قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا حني قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this gorgeous Saturday morning. We have some amazing ladies lined up to talk to you about a whole host of different but very, very important matters, because we as women do care and we do matter. We're going to talk childhood obesity with someone from the Eden Clinic. We're also going to be talking with Shanila Mohammed from Amnesty International. But right now we're going to talk gender-based violence. We are heading into the 16 days of no violence against women and children, and we need to play our role in shouting out loud and making certain that we and our sisters are safe and protect what is rightfully our territory and say no to the men or no to the perpetrators. There was an amazing event that took place, a 2-day summit of GBV and a whole host of role players from government and other entities attended the summit and made their voices heard. 2 of those amazing ladies are in studio this morning talking to us about issues around GBV, gender-based violence, and they are Nardos Bekele Thomas and Lindiwe Khoza. Nardos is the head of the UN here in South Africa, and Lindiwe tells me she wears many hats. So we're going to ask her to tell us about all of her different roles in her personal life and in public life as well. Let's introduce you to these amazing women. Morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Lovely to have you guys here, because we're going to be talking about something very important. Now, we know that for years and years on end, we've been talking gender-based violence, and I kind of wonder if our voices are loud enough. I'm wondering if the perpetrators are hearing us, and if they're not hearing us, why are they not hearing us? So we're going to respond to those issues, and you're also going to share what was unpacked at the conference. But first up, welcome as head of the United Nations and having 17 agencies reporting into you, GBV being one of them. Welcome to our beautiful country as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julie.
Having 17 agencies, including the GBV portfolio under you, reporting into you here in South Africa, is there any one of them closest to your heart?
Well, as head of the UN, I serve normally the 17 agencies with neutrality and making sure that we all deliver the SDGs and support the country and the government. But certainly, I've come from UNDP. My background is UNDP. I've been with UNDP for almost 3 decades. And therefore, I am much more, in a way, part of the UNDP system. But the UN in general, has to work together. It's interrelated, it's interlinked. And therefore, there is no one agency against the other, or, I don't have any favoritism. The most important thing is to look at the bigger picture, which is the SDGs, and see on how we can bring our expertise and our knowledge to make sure that we help the government realize the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, we will come back to you and talk about what you're seeing in South Africa as far as GBV is concerned. What was unfolded at the summit, and what do you believe collectively we need to do to make a difference? Lindy, we're lovely having you in studio.
Thank you.
You wear many hats. Tell us about them. And which one would you say is your favorite hat? Has it got to do with the color of the hat?
Well, I'm a development worker. I think it's a journey and one's responsibility as a member of the public. That's a hat. That's my most favorite hat, because that takes me into streets, into backyards, takes me anywhere in the community where there is a need for a space for development. However, I also do serve in different institutions at Gender Links as the SA Program Officer. I also serve at EYD as Deputy Chair and also in the SAWID Secretariat. But I must say my most favorite hat to wear is when I come together with other young women who realize that now is the time as young women to follow on the footsteps of women who have already led our society before, who've made strides to try and end gender-based violence and to end poverty and to create spaces for women to be empowered. And this cohort of young women that I serve who also serve in different institutions like the trade unions, in corporates, in business, etc. We come together as a collective regularly to address the question of bridging the gap and bringing young women into spaces to help serve and support women who are already in positions of leadership.
Now, I know you studied politics and
international relations.
Right. So you obviously have been exposed to the wider world, so to speak, through your studies and all of the different hats that you wear, the roles that you play, and you play a huge role in society. Let's look at the women in the rural areas perhaps, or women who have been marginalized as far as education and so forth is concerned. We know those gaps are ever widening, and there are a whole host of reasons for that. And if that gap can be closed, there is a better future for our women and girls going forward. What do you believe should be done in closing that gap? And I know it's a huge ask. It can't be done with just a handful of people.
Yeah, I mean, as a community activist, I believe what needs to be done is for us as members of the public, as members of the community, to get up and work and roll up our sleeves, partner with government. I'm not from the school of thought that says government has to do everything. As a collective in the community, we have the answers amongst ourselves, and really no one is coming to save us. No one. We are the ones that we've been waiting for, and I think that's what needs to be done.
We need to mobilize.
We need to mobilize. A woman in the rural area who lives in the rural area has within her, she lives with the struggles, she knows the answers, she knows where the water stream in the community has to be built, and she knows the correct intervention because that is her life, and she can cost a project that generally gets costed by experts. So I think development is a collective action, and I think if there's the most important integration is us, that as a small community of people knowing and realizing that we ourselves can make that difference.
And I like what you say. You don't necessarily need a formal education. Yes, that piece of paper would probably, the diploma or the degree would probably open doors and allow you easier access, but we shouldn't undermine our rural sisters because they do have guts, they do have what it takes, and I think they just need perhaps a hand up, not a handout, a hand up, to make their dreams a realization.
Yeah, I mean, first we're humans before we take up any role in community or even in government, and I think there really needs to be a cohesion. Now more than ever is the time for us to engage as human first to one another, before we could point fingers and say, oh, you're the councillor, you promised to deliver on X, Y, Z. Part part of the lack of accountability, and I mean, it's on research. People fail to be accountable because they do not have enough resources to be accountable. There isn't enough budget, or there isn't a specific legislature in place that enables them to hold even their colleague, or say one government department to another. And it's a question of resources and how they are positioned to serve. And I see a president of a global institution as an uncle or an aunt. I see them first before I
in that light.
In that light, and the need for human sustainability. And what I like, which is what Nardos has mentioned, is the SDGs. And we have that framework in place. And if South Africa, together with other countries, could look at the Sustainable Development Goals and work towards achieving, I think in the end we would have a universal sustainability.
Okay, let's go for our ad break. But I like that what you're saying is that, and what Nardos has expressed to you, is that there is hope. It's about the collective. If we can come together collectively, we can make anything and everything a possibility and a reality. Let's go for our first ad break. I have two amazing ladies in studio with me. Nardos Bekele Thomas, who is the head of UN right here in South Africa, and Lindiwe Kosa, a lady who wears many, many hats. Don't go away. We have entered the 16 days of no violence against women and children. We shouldn't be having this discussion, but sadly, it's a reality in society, not only in South Africa, but globally. Why is it happening? How do we conscientize or socialize the perpetrators that this violence cycle can be broken for once and for all? Nardos.
Thank you. Actually, you're right, absolutely right, because this is one of the worst threats to society. And there is so much complacency, impunity. Patriarchy is doing us harm. There are cultures and norms that are really detrimental to women's development, and we need to fight it. And you're right, why didn't this happen before? There has been so much happening, but I think, in my opinion, today is the time to really look into it, and the GBV summit was fantastic in coming out with all actions that need to be taken by the different actors. The justice system should really be reformed and look into this matter seriously, because victims are victimized. It's not only just being victims, the victimization of victims is because of the failures of our institutions that are put in place to protect society, to protect women and young children, and they're failing us. So why are they failing us? We need to really look at corruption. We really need to look at bureaucracy. We really need to look at our business processes. And it's very important that the government takes this seriously, because, the violence has reached a point where it's become intolerable.
You've been in the country for just over a year. And it's frightening to hear you expressing these views with your eyes, through your new eyes, looking at us in South Africa. What is the single solution? And I know it can't be a single solution. It's truly multifaceted. But what do you think is the first thing we in South Africa have to get right or put in place for everything else to start coming right?
I think the first thing is the recognition of the fact that this is a social problem, but it has escalated to be a social crisis, a national crisis, and the government needs and the country needs to take measures that are commensurate with activities, things that are crisis. When there is a disaster, what happens? All forces come together in an integrated manner and have a sort of a mechanism for a rapid response. And this needs really an urgent response, an immediate response. So the acceptance of the fact that this is a crisis is actually one big step to take. And then second is really to put in place the mechanisms that you require to make sure that this emergency is captured, this emergency does not recur, and there are mitigating forces that we put in place. The justice system, we really need to do something. We did a study, this was a study by the UN, on bystanderism. Why do people just bystand and do nothing? And one of the things that have come out is that if you give 50 rands to the police, the perpetrator is left, and you're afraid that that same person would come in and rape you and violate you. So there is no confidence in the institutions. So, people feel that there is a double victimization.
Absolutely, and what you're highlighting, which Lindiwe will agree with me as well, is the issue about just how far down the rot goes, and we're talking about one very powerful but detestable word: corruption.
Corruption, yeah.
It starts at the lowest level and goes up to the highest level.
And certainly, and values and standards have gone down to the bottom. And, we've lost our values. Societal values are no more. And we really need to build the societal values.
Absolutely.
That's why I like Lindway. The community workers and the UN works with the community workers and see on how we can build these values right from school to our leaders.
Are you happy with this type of support you get or the input that you get from the UN?
We are happy. We've just sat at the GBV summit, which the president, we demanded it, and the president heeded to the call. And Nardos was there, and we appreciated the contribution of the United Nations, the speech and the sentiment and the support, in which was at the end of the day a culmination of what brought about the charter. Our view is that the most critical thing that needs to happen now is for Treasury to allocate a portion of this country's income to the empowerment and development of women. So we do need, it's a question of gender budgeting, and we need a serious commitment from the President in his next speech, State of the Nation address, together with ministers, to say this is how much is going into their kitty to address the question of GBV. Shelters go without funds. There are so many victims out there who do not even have a home to go and run to. We need to address those issues, so it's really coming to having a legislation that binds government to say this is how we are going to roll out budgeting in terms of women's empowerment in the country. That also includes GBV work.
Lindiwe, I'm wondering, as you were speaking, so many thoughts have been running through my mind, and that is re-socialization of the perpetrators, socialization of perpetrators from a very early age. I think those things need to be put in place. Otherwise, we're going to see this this movie playing out over and over and over again with no change happening. The Department of Social Development needs to play a role. The Ministry for Representing Women, they've been so dormant. I don't think they've accounted for anything they've done this past year. So those are the type of things I'm hoping is going to happen. Possibly also maybe lengthier sentences for the perpetrators, but then we come to a chicken and egg situation, because that very perpetrator might be the head of the household, and if you incarcerate him, this household is going to go hungry for a couple of months or a couple of years. So we're sitting with truly a multifaceted problem here. I don't know, I'm just thinking socialization. Do you believe that that might be the starting block?
I think we need to raise a new level of consciousness, not just on the perpetrator, on the victim, and every government official and worker in NGOs, everyone that is doing the work on GBV. We need to raise them to a new level of consciousness, to come to a point where they realize that women also are human. South Africa fought for apartheid, for the end of apartheid. You can imagine the amount of work that and intensity and energy and efforts, collaboration and negotiations that were involved in trying to end the scourge against black people and the question of race in the country. Now imagine all that effort to have to invest it now in trying to bring the question of dignity of a woman. To say the fact that I'm of a different sex does not mean that I'm less of a human being, and I think that is a level of consciousness that we need to raise. But however, all of that, at the back of that, is the need for resourcing. It's a need of a legislature that will enforce that those resources are allocated, and that institutions on the ground, they work efficiently and effectively to serve the community. And I actually also want to say that the whole notion of RDP in South Africa was not just really about the building of houses. It was the question of consciousness, of
and dignity,
upskilling, of healing, of the complete psyche and of health and wellness of beings of South Africans. And I think, like I have alluded earlier on, it's not just a role for government. This requires all of us, even those in our communities who know of violence that is being perpetrated on children and women and keep quiet. They are party
absolutely
to the
yes,
violence.
and as Nardis has indicated earlier on, don't be a bystander, because if you stop being a bystander, perhaps that will be the start to change. Almost wrap up time. What are the thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, I think, it's very important, like Lindwe said, that this is a social problem. It affects each one of us. I mean, yes, most importantly, the victims that we've seen and we've heard, we were shedding tears when they were narrating their stories. It's just incredible how a human being could be treated this way, and also how the perpetrators could dare do that unless they are, unless they're out of their minds. And I think they must be, under alcohol or, under drugs. It's incredible how society could be like this, could be just like animals, worse than animals. So we really need to address that, and let's each one of us play our role. But most importantly, let's hold our institutions to be responsible and accountable for what we have given them as a role to play.
Thank you indeed. Final words from you, Lindiwe.
Just to say that we want to, from the ground as community workers, we want to strengthen the existing gender machinery. We want to support the Ministry of Women and all related departments that are working to end violence in the country, on violence on women and children in the country. And I think really the future of the country is in good hands.
Absolutely.
If we come together,
if we work together
as a collective. So we want a council, a GBV council that will be chaired by the president, that will be budgeted for. That will go through Parliament within the right legislation framework, and I mean we've rolled up our sleeves. We're ready to work.
Absolutely,
we're ready to work.
I do hope and pray that if God spares us all in good health, that we are able to sit here together next year at the same time and be sharing good news with the rest of the country, suggesting that the issues around GBV have dropped and have dropped drastically. quickly, and this is due to the fact that we've all rolled up our sleeves and we've all made a meaningful difference.
And if I can add, the most importantly thing is our moral authority, our religious leaders, our, institutions, need spiritual institutions.
They should shout out loud.
They should shout out.
Absolutely.
Because this is really crisis.
Ladies, thank you indeed for being with us. I certainly hope you've enjoyed that and sharing your insights regarding GBV. Go well. God bless.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That was Nardos, the head of the UN, and the lovely Lindiwe, the lady who claims to wear many hats, talking about GBV, a summit they've just come out of. And let us all start making a difference by stop being bystanders. From the UN, head of the UN, who was in the studio a few minutes ago talking gender-based violence, we now have the lovely Shanila Mohammed. She is the Executive Director of Amnesty International South Africa, talking to us about two issues also dealing with women. The one who has been incarcerated since 2012, that is Dr. Afia Siddiqui. And the first one we're going to talk about is Suu Kyi, the lady in Burma. Everybody had pinned their hopes on Suu Kyi and felt that once her house arrest has been lifted, she will truly fight for the rights of all the people of Burma, including the minority groups. Unfortunately, as we've seen over the past year or two, the Rohingya people have been absolutely thrown out of the country. They've, I think, short of saying there was ethnic cleansing happening in that part of the world, I can't add any more to that. Shanila Mohammed, Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam, thank you for having me.
Amnesty International have taken a very, very strong stance against Suu Kyi. She was everybody's hero. She was every woman's hero, mine too. And then she fell from grace. Tell us what happened, what led up to the point where Amnesty International decided to take back the award given to her, bestowed upon her, and why do you believe that that was the right action to have taken?
Thanks, Juby. I mean, as we all know, Aung San Suu Kyi was somebody who was tormented, who was, whose human rights were violated by the junta in Burma, in Myanmar, and during the time that she was being oppressed, during the time her rights were being violated, when she was under house arrest, Amnesty at the time made her a prisoner of conscience, and what that meant was that we fought very, very vigorously for her rights. I mean, there are many prisoners of conscience, many of South African leaders who were in jail, like Cyril Ramaphosa, Madiba, we fought for their rights. So she was one of them as well. And at some point, we gave her, in 2003, in 2009, we awarded her with what we call the Ambassador of Conscience Award. Now, it's not your typical sort of award. What it actually comes with is a lot of responsibility and a lot of trust and faith in you and hope in you that as a leader you will carry on being an ambassador of conscience, that we saw as Amnesty somebody in you who you saw and I saw in her, who is able to lift herself above everything and continue to fight for the rights of minorities, to fight for the rights of everybody in the world when and if need be. So in 2003 we bestowed this on her. She was under sorry I keep on saying 2003, but it's 2009. Mm-hmm. She was under house arrest at the time. She was unable to accept the award. So when she was released in 2012, we had a ceremony where Bono, who is also one of our recipients, gave her the award. And at the time, Jubi, the interesting thing, when she received the Amnesty Award, one of the things she said to Amnesty was, please do not take your eyes off us. Watch us, monitor us, make sure that we do not stray. So Amnesty took that very seriously. And we did that over the years. And, unfortunately, we reached a point on the 11th of November this year where our Secretary General, Kumi Naidoo, who, as you know, is a South African activist, and we're very proud to have him leading us now, took the decision that we were now going to revoke that award. And our reason for that was that we felt that she no longer was a prisoner of conscience. She had lost her conscience, and that, she continues not only to ignore what is happening to the Rohingya, to other people, to the closing of space for journalists, but she's also part of the problem now. And for me, that is the hardest thing to stomach, that somebody whose own rights were violated is now part of violating the rights of others.
How did she or her office respond to this honor, this award being revoked?
Well, she herself has not responded, but we've had people from within her government saying a couple of things. I think there was one official who came out to the media. They haven't responded directly to us. And we gave her the time when Kumi sent the letter, and again, I'd like to say this, it was with huge sadness on our part. It's the first time we've ever done something like this. So, it's not something we took lightly. And people keep asking Amnesty, why did you take so long? And the reason we did that was we wanted to give her the chance. We wanted to try to analyze what was going on. Is she under pressure? Is something happening? And we continued to do our research and our analysis, and we came to the conclusion that no, this is a choice she's made.
Did she ever at any stage interact with Amnesty International and explain her position to Amnesty or any other organization?
Well, that we have been, even our South Asia office, because of from Bangladesh, because the Rohingya are there, and in fact they call them Bengalis on the other side, on the Aung San Suu Kyi side. We've tried many times, to show her what was going on. We've been in touch. And her response is usually to downplay it, to say, well, it's not as serious as Amnesty is saying, which is not true, because we don't rely on secondary sources of information. We do our own research on the ground, and so this is something that we can stand by and vouch for. What is happening to the Rohingya people there is a crime against humanity. The rapes, the murders, and in fact her government has come out and said things like, well, this is an exaggeration. People are pretending that they were raped, and in fact you've had people in her sort of government coming out and calling the Rohingya people thorns that need to be plucked. They call them fleas. And we've been through a similar thing in Africa with Rwanda, where people were being called cockroaches. So, not only, and the worst thing she's doing, Jerry, I must tell you, is that she is blocking UN officials from coming down and gathering evidence. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but about a month ago in October, I think the Human Rights Council in Geneva took a very bold step where they passed a resolution calling for an investigation into what was happening with the Rohingya, and she's blocking that. And then, as Amnesty, we're saying, okay.
How is she blocking it? Preventing from the investigators from coming into the country?
Yes, she's not allowing them to come into the country. And as Amnesty, what we're saying is that we need to follow up on that UN resolution. We need to jump on it and get the evidence and push this to the International Criminal Court, because these are criminals. They are killing, maiming, brutalizing people, and they need to be held to account.
So, Shanila, whom are you going to hold to account? Suu Kyi or other government officials in Myanmar?
As far as we're concerned, anybody who violates or is part of the violation of rights is culpable. And whether Aung San Suu Kyi is if the investigators find, it's all based on evidence. If the investigators find that she and her people were part of it, then they need to be held to account. If the military junta, we know, are part of it, because Amnesty has got so much evidence on this, and that we will be providing at the time, then they will be held to account. But I think the biggest message Amnesty is sending with the revoking of this award is to leaders around the world that you cannot continue to act and get away with things with impunity. And it doesn't matter whether you were part of a movement, a freedom fighter, you yourself, your rights were violated. If you do not carry on being a leader, if you do not carry on with your conscience intact, fighting for the rights of people who are, whose rights were being violated like yours, then as far as we're concerned, we are not going to associate with you. And I think that is the strong message that we're sending, is that now for us, Aung San Suu Kyi is in the same category as other leaders who are violating rights. And it doesn't matter what our history with her was.
We have an amazing advocate here in South Africa, Shibna Mait.
Yes.
As it happens, she is an advocate by profession, but she advocates for human rights issues, very especially the Rohingya situation.
I do know her.
It's kind of gone under the radar. A couple of months ago, it was in our faces by mainstream media all the time. Is that suggesting perhaps that things have quietened down in that part of the world because the entire world is focusing on them, or are the atrocities still playing out as we speak?
You know what happens to us, Gibi, is that we have become a world of trauma, of, every day we wake up, there's a new disaster, there's a new trauma, there's a new story. And I think people become saturated. But I think the media also plays a huge role, because what we do is we move on to the next big story.
Right.
And when I was training, my background is journalism, so when I was training as a journalist, one of the things we always did was we always did follow-ups. We always made sure that we went back and told I was a print journalist, our readers, what happened on this thing. And I think what happens with us is we move on from story to story. But I also think that, when it comes, and I say this honestly with humbleness and with not meaning to disrespect anybody, but some people's lives seem to be more important than others. And, at the moment, the Muslim world...
Some stories are bigger and more important than others.
Yes. And at the moment, the Muslim world is under siege. We have Palestine, we have the Rohingya, we have, the Muslims in China, we have Yemen, and I think that, there's this attitude out there, which I think September the 11th created, 9/11, that those lives are less important than other lives. So, one person dies in America, it becomes a massive thing. Millions and millions and thousands of Muslims, Yemenis, are starving to death, and yet, it's an occasional story.
Or even a story in Africa. So black lives, as far as the Western world is concerned, black lives don't matter. Let's go for an ad break. We'll be back in a minute or two. Shanila Mohammed is our guest. She's the Executive Director of Amnesty International South Africa, talking to us about Suu Kyi and the fact that they recalled the honor that they bestowed on her in 2009, I think it was. But right after the break, we're going to talk about Dr. Afia Siddiqui. There are murmurings in the background that she is soon to be released from incarceration in the United States. Let's hear what's led to those rumors, and hopefully if there are any facts behind that story. The Executive Director of Amnesty International, Shanila Mohammed, is here talking to us about, obviously, the Myanmar situation. And now we're going to try and focus on the backstory of Dr. Afia Siddiqui's incarceration in the United States. But before we get there, let's just find out who is this woman, Shanila Mohammed, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International. How did that come about for you? I know you come from a journalistic background, but to land this position, and you've been in this position for quite some time now.
Yes. So Julie, really, I was born in Pakistan and I grew up in Zimbabwe, and I've been in South Africa for 20 years now. And I think as a journalist, one of the things I did at some point as a journalist is I got offered a job in Dubai on the Gulf News as a bureau chief for the Northern Emirates. And at that time, I was covering the first Gulf War. And I was very, very distressed and horrified at, firstly, the way in which the media was operating there, like CNN, coming into people's homes. and really, it's interesting for me to see how CNN is being attacked by the American government now, because there was a time when CNN was the arm of the American government, and they were basically in the Gulf reporting things that were just not true, trying to incite, a sort of thing against the Muslims. And I would be on the other side of it, and I'd be watching the same things
and
they were watching.
And your story wouldn't get told.
And I would be thinking, what are they talking about? And I think at some point I realized that I really do need to be on the other side. I need to not only be the one telling the stories, because I'm still very into my journalism, so it's not like I've stopped, but I also want to be somebody who's going to be able to make the difference and do things to make the difference. And that's when I switched over and moved into becoming a human rights activist and really taking up sort of issues. And I've always been very passionate about issues that affect women, because my mother, I grew up in a domestic violence home. My mother was battered all the time, and I also was in a marriage that was abusive. And so I felt like I needed to make sure that I made a difference to people's lives.
Give a voice to the voiceless. Let's just backtrack before we go to the Afia Siddiqui story. Do you think that the actions by Amnesty International on Suu Kyi, by retracting the honor of the award, is going to make any difference at all? Is it just really about a very strong message going out to the rest of the world?
I think it will make a difference. I think, one of the things, and I say this again with humbleness, because Amnesty is not an organization. We're a movement of people. So you, me, it's, we are a movement of people who take injustice personally. So I think it will make a difference. I think if you watch the media yesterday,
it was all over.
And leaders are affected by this because their egos are so great. And, and that's the reality. Their egos are so great. They want to be loved. They want to be seen as the darlings of the world. And again, what he did, and forget about her, because we will continue to fight for the Rohingya people with or without her. But what he did was it raised the profile of the Rohingya people again, and what is happening to them again. And I think this is what we have to continue to do.
So some amazing good has come out of this action. Wonderful. Kudos to you and your team. Dr. Afia Siddiqui is a neuroscientist. She was working in Afghanistan, and in 2010 she was whisked away and thrown into prison in the United States, and there were a whole host of terrorism charges filed against her, and it was also said that she was plotting to kill military personnel in Afghanistan. It sounds like it sounds so far-fetched. This tiny little woman, a doctor, and these sort of allegations were made against her. What is Amnesty International doing in creating the awareness around her plight? We've also heard that she's very sick at the moment, and there's also talk out of Pakistan that her family are negotiating with the current Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, to try and get her released from, and this probably is the 100th attempt of getting Dr. Afia Siddiqui released, which we're not sure. We are hopeful, but we're not sure whether it's going to happen or not.
Julie, well, as Amnesty, like I said to you, I've been in touch with our US team, I've been in touch with our South Asia team, and I think, one of the things that Amnesty has been part of this case since it happened. We were there at the trial. We were there to try to make sure that she got as fair a trial as possible. And I agree with you. Our interpretation is that it's a very, very strange story. Even in court, there was very little evidence that was produced to back up the things that were being said. And yet she received an 86-year sentence, and she's a petite, tiny woman, like you said. At the moment, she has cancer. She's very ill, and she is suffering from psychological issues. Apparently, she underwent a huge amount of torture, rape, and other things while she was in custody. And I think Pakistan, as far as I'm aware, and Amnesty is is sort of aware of this. Pakistan is trying very hard to try to get her back. I think the family now is again talking to like you said, to Imran Khan. But Imran is not liked by the US, and that's the other thing, and I think they've tried on a number of occasions to get her back, and that was under regimes that were favorable to the US. Imran Khan is not somebody that the US likes at all, because he's somebody, and this comes from my Pakistani background, he's somebody who has been challenging them, talking about the drones, talking about the killings that have been happening. So, unfortunately, it's a very tough situation for the family. She's very, very ill, and we're hoping that on grounds of humanity that something will happen. I think Amnesty is also trying from their side, but the US at the moment is a very difficult place to operate in. In fact, if I was to be honest with you, it's just the global world has become a difficult place to operate in. Spaces are shrinking. So it's our hope that Imran Khan will be able to make the difference.
There was talk about a prison exchange situation, and also that she'd serve the rest of her sentence back home in Pakistan, which I find absolutely ludicrous. But be that as it may, do you think that's a possibility, prison exchange?
Well, I think the US had said no. Okay, the US had turned it down. And but I'm sure that if I think what's going to happen is that there's got to be fresh negotiations. There's got to be a fresh initiative that has to go out to the US, or the family has got to sue on grounds of humanity. Getting her released on humanitarian grounds. But it's a very, and unfortunately, and this is why I fight the fight that I fight, is because there are so many innocent people out there whose lives have been totally devastated by people who feel that they have the right to abuse their power. And I think this is one of those cases, where an innocent woman, who basically was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Absolutely.
And was not protected.
How can we as civil society make a difference? Can we? Is there anything we should be doing, can be doing? Petitions to be signed? Anything at all?
Well, I think that definitely. I think that people should be writing letters to the Pakistani government. I think that, people should be putting pressure, which is something that we do, as Amnesty, we continue to put pressure and to say, look, you've got to take the step. And I think, the media has got to keep on highlighting these things and continue to put her story there. I mean, I think, Muslim journalists who are in the US should go to the prison and try to find out what's going on with her. But what happens is we become the forgotten people until somebody decides that they're going to raise it. So, I mean, I think that, it's great for the people who are continuing to do this, but I think we all have to continue to take injustice personally and say that, she is, in a way, she's our sister, she's our daughter, she's somebody that we have to fight for, and not leave it to somebody else.
We obviously put our hands together and make lots and lots of dua that this does become a possibility. Common sense prevails, and inshallah she is reunited with her family sometime soon. Almost wrap up time. What else is Amnesty looking at, trying to change at this point in time?
Well, I think that, one of our big things at the moment is we're very concerned actually about the fact that, there's shrinking space. People are just not being allowed to say what they think or do what they think. And I think that's one of the big things that we are now going to be working on. But I also think, in South Africa particular, because I'm the South Africa director, we are very concerned about the high levels of violence in this country, particularly against women. And so I was happy to hear that, you are talking about it. I think, the 16 days of activism is for me something that raises awareness, but I think we've got to start doing things in a much more, litigative and holding the state to account for not creating an environment of safety, because at the end of the day, the buck ends with the government. We are also very much involved in things like the national health insurance. We're looking at, the fact that unless people get what is their right, they are not going to be able to live happy lives.
You alluded to the NHI. Why? Particularly at this juncture?
Well, it's and what we, in the past, Amnesty, we just work on political rights and, if you were arrested or whatever. But over the years, we came to realize that actually people's social economic rights are also rights. And if you don't have access to health, if you don't have access to water, if you don't have access to housing, then your rights are being violated. So, one of the things that we're trying to say to government is don't make promises you can't keep. Oh. So do not say to the citizens, we will give you a national health insurance scheme that is going to work, when 5 years down the line you come back and say, oh, sorry, we were wrong. They did that with education.
So you have your doubts about NHI?
No, we don't have our doubts. We think that actually something has to change. South Africa is way too unequal and something has to change. But whatever they put into place, we are tired of money being spent and results not being achieved. So what we're saying is let's look at this. Let's see how NHI can be successful. Let's look at the lessons in other countries and not just make promises to citizens that you're not going to keep.
I think NHI is very definitely a discussion for another time, yes, because we can unpack all the details. For now, your very strong message, having been a victim of violence yourself, gender-based violence, and your mom as well, what's the strong message you want to leave the perpetrators with? The victims are what they are, secondary victims, and they probably will remain victims for the rest of their lives, sadly, sad to say. But what's your message to the perpetrators?
When I think about it, and let me put it in an Islamic context, because we're talking, most of our audience is Muslim. If you look at Hazur Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the way in which he operated, I feel that often, I listen to these things when...
And the high status he afforded to
exactly,
women. And the fact that he emancipated women.
I always think about that story that I was told at madrasa where, a son said to Hazur Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam one day, his mother had asked him for water and she was asleep, and he stood there and he waited for her to wake up, and he said, will I go to Jannah? And Hazur Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, not even. That was just nothing compared to what your mother is worth. And I think that, if the perpetrators started to live their life in a sunnat way, in the way in which Hazur Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam instructed us to, then we wouldn't have these levels of violence. We wouldn't see women as second-class citizens. You wouldn't think that a woman belongs to you. A woman does not belong to you. She belongs to herself and she belongs to Allah. She doesn't belong to you. So if we started to see women as people of respect, this is somebody who has carried your children, who has brought up your children, who has been there by your side, and the minute you lift a hand to her, you are, as far as I'm concerned, you are haram. You are doing something that is not allowed. Then men would stop doing that sort of stuff. And I think, what's happened as well is religion has become egotistic, where it's, it's really that I am the man, I am the one in charge, whereas everyone has a role to play. And Hazur Sallam's life showed us that everybody has a role to play. A man has a role to play, a woman has a role to play, but nobody has the right to abuse and to and the way in which and if you think about, even if you go to the absolute root of it, when they say if your wife misbehaves, so it's take a feather or it's not about punching people till they're black and blue in the face. It's nothing like that.
I love the perspective you've brought, but very quickly we're wrapping up now. Mm-hmm. Why do you believe we're seeing the levels of violence that we're seeing not only in South Africa but all around the world?
I think there's high levels of frustration. I think that, when people are frustrated, they try to attack the weaker sex. And I also think that, the role of men and women have changed, Julie. And I think men are struggling with that. When I think about myself, I'm a single mother. I brought up my two sons all by myself. And so I will have a perspective on life, and I think men are struggling with that shift, where women are now getting a divorce if they're unhappy, whereas when I got married, I was told you're married for life, and I think the world has changed, right, and people are struggling to catch up with it.
It's been absolutely delightful having you in studio this morning, even though we've discussed the darker side of life on the show. It's discussions that had to happen. Hopefully it strikes a chord with a couple of people out there, and hopefully that will make them rethink the status quo and possibly make changes meaningful changes in their own lives.
Inshallah.
To hope I can have you back again sometime soon in the new year. You go well, and assalamu alaikum to you.
Walaikum salam.
That was Shanila Mohammed, Executive Director of Amnesty International, talking to us about Suu Kyi, her honorary award being recalled, the situation with Afia Siddiqui, and some thoughts on gender-based violence. We're going to be talking sugar addictions and the high rates of child obesity right here in South Africa. And welcome back. We now have Paula Galvao from the Eden Life Clinic or Well Center, which is here in Johannesburg. They deal with food addictions, and she'll also talk to us about what other addictions they deal with at the clinic. She herself suffered from obesity at some point in her life. She's a pharmacist by profession, and she has gone on to open and run Eden Life Wellness Center. The reason we have Paula in studio today is several studies have been done indicating that South African adolescents and teenagers are suffering from obesity, and we hold the record of the highest rate of obesity in children globally. That's very, very frightening. Why is this happening? Is it lifestyle? Is it diet? And what can we do to change all of this? These are the questions Paula is going to answer during the course of the interview. But let's start at the beginning by talking about the clinic and why it was necessary for her to go down this route. Paula, morning. Welcome to the program.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in and sharing your expertise with us on the show this morning. And it's very, very valuable and educational information that you're going to share with us.
Thank you.
Why did you start Eden Life Clinic or Eden Wellness Center?
I had a weight problem. I grew up as a fat child. I became a fat teenager and then a fat adult. I went to university. At the end of university, I weighed 113 kilos.
Sure.
And I really had a problem. I was completely addicted to food. The reason I would get up every morning would be to get out of my bed and go and grab 2 bar ones out of the cupboard.
In the morning?
First thing in the morning. That was my reason for getting out of bed. So I really had a serious food addiction problem. The reason I became a pharmacist is because I had tried every possible weight loss program out there. There wasn't anything that I hadn't tried, but nothing worked. And I eventually went to a cosmetic surgeon, and I remember him telling me to strip down to almost naked, and he was taking my stomach, which was huge, and going, and this needs to go, and that needs to go. It was the most humiliating experience ever. I mean, that plunged me into a huge depression.
Which just started the cycle all over again. I have no doubt that you started comfort eating even more.
Exactly, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And so I realized that there actually wasn't an answer to obesity, and if I was going to help myself, I would have to find the answer. And so I became a pharmacist, and every day at varsity I would be working in the lab or in the library trying to find a solution to my problem. And while I was at varsity, I didn't come across the solution. Only after I graduated, I came across the right combination of ingredients to help me lose weight. My friends all noticed me losing weight. Not immediately. I think I had lost about 35 kilos before anyone said. I think they were too scared to say, "Are you losing weight yet again?" So 35 kilos later, someone said, "Are you losing weight?" And I said, "Guess what? I finally got the solution." Well, I'll never forget the look on this person's face. It was, "Oh no, not again." And I decided then, okay, I will now shush until I finished losing weight. Long story short, I lost 50 kilos in 8 months. And then I told everyone what I had done. Well, everyone wanted the product, so I started mixing them for everyone. All my friends, they lost weight. Their friends wanted it. So I was giving products away. I mean, I really had no inclination to business. I was giving them all the products. One day my husband sat me down and he said, "Paula, please, can we just charge them cost price? Whatever the ingredients are costing, let's just charge them that. Because really, you're giving everything away. We have nothing left." So that's how Eden Life came about.
How long are you in operation?
We started the clinic 23 years ago, and we've been running strong ever since.
Okay, so you help people with food addictions. Is that the only addiction that you work with?
We have dealt with alcohol addiction for a little bit and drug addiction, but it's not our main area of expertise. The addictions really go hand in hand. They work on endorphins, how the brain releases endorphins, so they really work hand in hand. So we do deal with a little bit of the other addictions, but always with the psychiatrist who's treating the patient.
Your focus obviously is on food addictions.
Definitely, and weight loss.
You've been obviously in operation for about 20 years now, and you testimony to the fact that you've lost all of that weight. How hard do you have to work on yourself to maintain your weight as it is? In fact, as I look at you now, I think you're way too thin. So, and you know, there is a saying that says you can't be too rich or too thin, and I suppose you subscribe to that, that notion.
Indeed. I just haven't got the too rich part right yet. The way I maintain my weight is, and this is what I share with my patients, when you're losing weight, your fat cell changes shape. So it starts off nice and round, it then becomes oval, and just after goal weight, your fat cell becomes round, very, very flat. It withdraws all the fat cell receptors, and only 20% of the fat cell receptors are there, exposed. So at that point, very little of what you eat is absorbed into the fat cell. So it becomes very easy to maintain your weight. And that's how I maintain. So if you get to the point where your fat cell has withdrawn the receptors, it becomes very easy to maintain your weight.
What's going to happen now? And I mean, you obviously you're going to respond as a scientist to my question. What's going to happen now if you go on a binge? And I'm not sure what your diet's like, but I can say that you are very thin. But let's say you start on binge eating now for a couple of months. Are you going to put on all that weight again, having shared the issue around the change of the shape of the fat cells?
Initially, no. So this is what we try and teach our patients, is that the losing the interest in food is a permanent thing. So when you lose the addiction to food, you really don't want to binge. I really don't want to sit and eat chocolates. For me, it's something that doesn't even cross my mind. Over the festive season, I see people sitting and eating boxes of chocolates. It's appalling. It's something that, to me, really is not interesting. But I understand how I've changed. So yes, if you sit with chocolates, and if I had to force feed myself, my fat cell definitely would revert, start exposing the fat cell receptors, and yes, I would then start to develop a biochemical imbalance. It would start with insulin resistance, then become leptin resistance, and yes, then I would be back at point A.
Okay, and your eating habits now, are they kind of pretty normal, breakfast, lunch and supper?
Yes, absolutely, very normal. I eat with my family, breakfast, lunch and supper, very normal.
You spoke about breaking that habit, that addiction to food. I'm sure that there's a lot of work that goes into it, but what is one of the key factors around that? Because I should imagine it works with any addiction, a gambling addiction, a sex addiction, a drug addiction. What is that one most important element in getting to break that trigger?
Okay, with weight loss, it's actually completely different, because there are biochemical imbalances that cause the addiction. So what we do is we treat the imbalance, and when you treat the imbalance, the problem is gone. So 90% of people who are overweight are insulin resistant. If you treat the insulin resistance, the imbalance is gone. So with insulin resistance, for example, if someone eats bread, they surge their insulin, it goes way, way, way high, and they get a rebound drop in serotonin. As soon as the serotonin drops, they start to crave, which makes them want more. So then they eat more, the insulin goes high again, they crave more. So this whole cycle is set up, so the more they eat, the more they want. We often don't understand it, especially in kids, why they can't stop eating. And it's because of that. The other problem is when you have a high insulin, you store fat very quickly. So one slice of bread will become 4. And that's where the problem comes. So even if they go on diet, let's say someone goes on diet, they get very discouraged because they don't lose weight. which stands to reason why they don't go on diet, because nothing happens. So, there's no room for judgment, because every time they go on diet, nothing happens. So they lose courage. Until you sort out the insulin resistance, you start to control the insulin and increase the serotonin at the same time, then all of a sudden it's like night and day. It's like chalk and cheese. Somehow they lose all interest in food, the insulin comes down, so they lose weight easily, and it's a completely different story.
Is this doable in children? Because we've shared some stats earlier on that in a recent study, the obesity rates in South Africa have doubled, and we are sitting at 14.9%, way ahead of any other country in the world. Why is that? What are we doing wrong, and how do we turn the situation around? So hold all of those thoughts. We're going for an ad break. We'll come back and talk about how we break the cycle. Is it possible? And are there any supportive drugs involved in losing weight? Paula is my guest. She runs the Eden Wellness Center here in Johannesburg, and she believes that if you have a weight problem, an obesity problem, which we know is exceptionally high in our country, then this is the go-to person, because I don't think breaking addiction can be done on one's own. You do need the supportive structures around you, and hopefully you'll be on the path of wellness. We're talking to Paula from the Eden Life Clinic. We're talking about obesity, and of course she shared her life's journey with us, why she's at the place where she's at now. She wants to help other people heal, very especially children, and we do know that obesity rates in South Africa are very, very high, alarmingly high. Why do you think that is so, Paula?
I think South Africa has gone through such a transitional period where we've really grown and had so much change. There's, in a lot of families, so much more disposable income, exposure to globalization, and this has really changed. There was a study done recently involving a team of researchers from Wits University and the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and they examined youngsters between the age of 4 to 6, and they examined, I think it was something like 1,200 youngsters, and they looked at the change of these youngsters over a period of time and the weight gain. And those who became obese in a short period of time they were 42 times more likely to become obese adults. And the reason is because of the increased disposable income that was now available to families. And I think that makes a big difference. Because families that now have disposable income, without the education of what food is doing for you, what food is bad for you, will go for sugary drinks, will go for saturated fats, high calorie, processed carbohydrates. And this is where the problem is. So it's really a lack of education, a lack of knowledge, and it will involve quite an extensive program involving our schools, involving teachers, involving parents, that needs to be done, and it really needs to be done extremely proactively and extremely quickly, because our obesity levels are epidemic at the moment, and it's not like we have the kind of finances that other countries have, and we don't have the resources that America has, for example, to deal with what's going to happen because of obesity to our health resources, for example.
Because obviously in the future we're going to have to be dealing with all of those problems that the obesity has resulted. From the obesity you are then going on to other medical issues.
Exactly.
The obesity would cause all of those, like diabetes and other issues. Exactly. And the health system will not, as you say, have the resources to manage all of that.
Yeah.
Are you also suggesting perhaps that we have become a nation of sugar addicts?
We have,
and how
indeed.
do we break the cycle?
We have indeed, and we need to very proactively and very aggressively break the cycle. I'm wondering if perhaps the talk about it is not like almost like a voice in the background that just goes on. We don't realize the severity of it. And if I can maybe just say, for example, we have two kinds of fat. We have white fat and brown fat. Brown fat is the healthy fat that we need to keep and nurture to keep ourselves healthy and keep ourselves lean. White fat, on the other hand, each white fat cell has what we call alpha-tumor necrosis factor linked to it. The problem with that is that alpha-tumor necrosis factor, listen to the words, tumor necrosis factor, has got a link to cancer. Specifically, and this is specifically for obese children, a link increases your risk to cancer, specifically leukemia. So you have an increased chance of leukemia, 60% increased chance of leukemia if you're a fat child. Now that's dramatic. So I can share from my own experience growing up as a fat child, a fat teenager, then a fat adult. I had long lost the weight. I was 35 years old, and I'm long past 35 now, but I was 35 when I was diagnosed with leukemia, out of the blue. And no one in my family has cancer. So these are realities that we need to understand, and it's something, and I'm long past leukemia now, but it's something that we need to understand. Even though I have a very healthy lifestyle and I'm very healthy, these are realities. There are always consequences to letting your children grow up overweight.
Your wellness program for the children, and I think you have a big focus on children with obesity issues.
Yes.
How does that work when someone consults with you about their obese children? What's that all going to entail? Okay.
Firstly, we like to speak to the children because children really go through a huge amount of emotional stress if they're overweight. For example, there's a study in the International Journal of Microbiology, and it was released in 2017, the November issue, and they said that if a child on the playground sees a fat child, an entire immune cascade is started in the thin child while they observe the fat child, because it's as if their body is exposed to a virus. That's how much children dislike other fat children. That's so sad and so intense. But these little kids who are only overweight because of what they're exposed to are having to deal with a constant rejection. There's another study that was in the South African Journal of Psychology, and it was by Berg and Mendelsohn, and they said that teachers are more likely to give a thin child high marks than a fat child. Now that's so sad, because we have to realize...
So fat people are being discriminated against?
Constantly, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. So fat children really need a lot of nurturing and a lot of help, and the easiest way to get rid of all of that is to get them to lose weight. So with our program, we like to get in, deal with it quickly, effectively, and get out again. The worst thing we like to do is create compulsive dieters. That's the worst thing you can do with your child, because you then just create long-term problems. If you're dieting compulsively, you create leptin resistance. So we go in, we get them to lose the weight quickly, we teach mom and child how to maintain the weight, and we're gone.
Do you have to have the children at the clinic for a couple of days, perhaps?
No, not at all.
For tests or anything?
No, not. We do send them for blood tests, dealing with their doctor or our in-house medical doctor. We address the biochemical imbalances, get in, treat it, and we're gone.
How long does the family have to persevere with this obese child? Let's assume this child is carrying an excess of 30 kgs in weight. How long are you going to have to work with the child? And now it's very difficult. One can't generalize, but let's just generalize in this instance.
I'm a firm believer in rapid weight loss. I really am, especially when it comes to kids. Because you want to get in, change the child's life and go. You don't want to create a long-term problem. You don't want the child to feel different. So we try and make the weight loss, make the eating plan as normal as possible, make it part of what the family is eating. So if it involves changing everything in the family's lifestyle, then we do it. So we make it a very normal plan and an easy plan. So the child doesn't feel different, doesn't feel ostracized, and it's but yet what they feel is like they're achieving something. And when people are saying, "Are you losing weight?" then they feel like
motivates them even more.
Exactly.
But give us a time factor. You're talking 3 months, 6 months.
Oh no, within a month they've lost a significant amount of weight, and within 3 months they should be there.
And this is without medical intervention. When I say medical, I'm talking tablets, injections, etc.
No, we use herbal supplements to assist the children, and if there's a need for tablets, then we like to involve their medical practitioner.
Okay. We know with adults, with children, we know that they're still going through the growing phase. So if they lose weight rapidly, they won't have a problem with sagging skin, which you do have with older people, with adults. Well, how do you have the person sitting with an additional problem? What's your answer to that, or how do you advise the patient going forward?
It depends on how you lose weight. Okay, now if you're going to lose weight on a high carbohydrate diet, your growth hormone will naturally come down. If you lose weight on a high protein diet, your growth hormone levels will go up, and that will help with your sagging skin. Having lost in total all the weight I've lost, I haven't had any sagging skin, and that's really a bonus.
So there are answers, and you can tailor-make any package to suit the particular needs of the child and the family.
Definitely.
If it's only the child that has the problem, an obese child in this family, and the rest of the family are fit, fine, and ready and raring to go, how are you going to adapt the child's eating habits to the rest of the family?
Very, very easily. So we would then look at having carbs in the morning, or at break, at school. And for lunch and dinner, you would have protein and veg, so chicken and veggies, or maybe some beans or lentils, and as a snack, some fruit, that sort of thing.
Absolutely sensible. Downside to the diets, downside to a person who's not performing as you've expected them to perform. Maybe they're cheating, maybe they haven't. Maybe they've just has something to do with their metabolism.
I've never seen that happen.
Really?
I've never seen that
So you
happen.
guarantee weight loss in children within a short space of time?
Absolutely. And I'm not scared to guarantee it, because really kids, adults, they want to lose weight. People who are scared to guarantee it are scared of their plans.
We know that we are a nation of sugar addicts, so we come to you and you put us on this amazing plan. What happens about the sugar? I'm a sugar addict. I'm not going to be able to live without it. I'm going to be obsessing about it all the time, but I'm on your diet plan. I'm on the Eden Life Clinic diet plan. How do you accommodate me for that?
You see, what you're saying is you're insulin resistant. So you're craving sugar because your serotonin is rock bottom. So what we need to do is increase your serotonin so that you lose all interest in sugar. And it happens automatically.
And I'll have an instant dislike to sugar.
No, not a dislike, but you won't crave it.
Okay, there you go. We've got a minute to wrap up time. Very quickly, your thoughts on artificial sweeteners?
Very unhealthy. So if you need it as a crutch to get to the end result, then use it for a short season. I would rather use I wouldn't suggest honey at all, because it really does spike your insulin terribly. So use it as a crutch to get to no sugar rather, and no sweetener. So as an interim, yes, but not long-term, and not for kids.
We getting into the holiday period, and people are going to throw caution to the winds. People who need to lose weight, they're going to come back in the new year having to lose even more weight. What's your advice to them?
That's fine. Just remember that when you do come back, don't give up. Keep going. There is help out there. Get the help you need and overcome this battle. You can overcome it.
Paula Galvao from the Eden Life Clinic, thank you indeed.
Thank you so
Continue
much.
your amazing journey, and continue making the fat children lose all of that excess weight and break those sugar addictions.
Thank you.
So it is possible, but you need the help, and please don't throw caution to the winds during the holiday period, because then you have a steeper mountain to climb in getting rid of all of the excess weight that you're carrying around. That's all we have time for. Thank you indeed for your company. I've loved having you on the show. I do hope you've enjoyed our company. To the production team, thank you indeed for your hard work, and to the rest of you, please take care on the roads. As always, it is Assalamu Alaikum and Khudafiz from me, Julie Ali.
يا هلا 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 قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا، حن قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا. يا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا، يا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا ويا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا، يا هلا.